Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We are continuing our reading of St. Augustine's Confessions. We are in Book VI, picking up on paragraph number 13. The text is quite introspective and helps us to think about our own spirituality and start to question, what he thinks and what we think. And I want to see where we differentiate as Muslims and, just see where our mind goes. Let's begin. Bismillah, paragraph 13. I was being urged incessantly to marry, and had already made my proposal and been accepted. My mother had done all she could to help, for it was her hope that, once I married, I should be washed clean of my sins by the saving waters of baptism. Okay, so we see some terminology here. Baptism, cleansing of the sins. She was delighted that day by day I was becoming more fitted for baptism, and in my acceptance of the faith she saw the answer to her prayers, and the acceptance of the faith, and the fulfillment of your promise. At my request, by her own desire, she daily beseeched you with heartfelt prayers to send her some revelation in a vision about my future marriage. But this you would not do. She had some vague and fanciful dreams, which were the result of her preoccupation with these thoughts. And when she told me about them, she treated them as if of no importance, and did not speak with the assurance that she had always had when you sent her visions. She always said that by some sense, which she could not describe in her words, she was able to distinguish between your revelations and her own natural dreams. All the same, the plans for my marriage were pushed ahead, and the girl's parents were asked for their consent. So here we get a peek into how marriage was conducted so long ago for them. She was nearly 2 years too young for marriage, but I liked her well enough and was content to wait. Okay, I wonder what age that was. 14. A group of my friends who detested the bustle and worry of life had all but decided to live a life of peace away from the crowd. We had thought over this project and discussed it together a great deal. The plan was to arrange this life of leisure by pooling our possessions and using such money as we had between us to create a common fund. So, communism! So literally wanted to be on a sort of commune. Pooling resources. In the spirit of sincere friendship, none of us would claim this or that as his own, but all would be thrown together and the whole would belong to each and all. Sounds nice, but never works. Because there's always going to be one who takes more and another who contributes less. So, you start carrying the dead weight. We thought that there might be about 10 members of our community, some of them very wealthy, especially Romanius, who came from my own town. He had been one of my closest friends since boyhood and had come to Milan on some urgent legal business connected with his affairs. He was most enthusiastic about our project, and he was far richer than the rest of us. His opinions carried great weight. We had agreed that 2 leaders should be chosen each year to deal with the day-to-day problems, while the rest of us were left to live in peace. So, 2 leaders to be selected to kind of run the show, while the rest just kind of cozy on. So hopefully they can rotate that. All men living together with no women. Homosexuals. But I was hoping to get married, and some of the others already had wives. And when we began to ask ourselves whether the women would agree to the plan, all of our carefully made arrangements collapsed and broke to pieces in our hands and were discarded. Because few women want to live in that type of situation. you know, if you have some property and each has their own area, but eventually there's going to be some adultery and fornication going on. Can't just have all these men and women mixed and living in this giant mansion. It's going to turn into Jersey Shore. If you recall that show, Jersey Shore, from the early 2000s. Paulie D. Snooki. Nonsense. Once more we turned to our sighs and groans. Again we trode the wide, well-beaten tracks of the world, and thought jostled thought in our hearts. But your will stands firm, and in the wisdom of your plan, you made light of ours, and prepared the way you had chosen for us. You were ready to grant us, in due time, our nourishment, ready to open your hand and fill our souls with your blessings. So some of them already had wives. And they clearly were like, oh honey, we're not gonna be trying to raise a family with all your spiritual gurus. I mean, you would think about it, you know, but the wives like fighting. 15. Meanwhile, I was sinning more and more. The woman with whom I had been living was torn from my side as an obstacle to my marriage. And this was a blow which crushed my heart to bleeding, because I loved her dearly. She went back to Africa, vowing never to give herself to any other man, and left with me the son whom she had borne me. What? So, he lived with this lady, and so he wasn't married to her, but they had already had relations. He loved her, then why didn't you marry her? She left, went to Africa. She stupidly said she wouldn't remarry. What a dumb idiot. It's retarded. And she leaves her son behind. So you leave your kid behind with your guy who won't marry you. And then you're like, I love you so much, I will never marry again. Meanwhile, he's literally going to be raising the kid and plans to get remarried. So he's getting some booty, getting to live it up, but you're going to go off to Africa and you're going to say no, and then you're just going to rot away for years and years saying no to every proposal because some guy far, far away used to like you. Like, this is just retarded. But I was too unhappy and too weak to imitate this example set me by a woman. I was impatient at the delay of 2 years, which had to pass before the girl whom I had asked to marry me became my wife. And 2 years is a long time. Because she could be like, you could be like a year and 6 months in, and then she's like, you know what, I don't want to marry you anymore. And you literally wasted all that time waiting for her. That's ridiculous. I ain't waiting no 2 years for a guy. And because I was more of a slave of lust than a true lover of marriage. I mean, marriage is all about having intimacy. That's the key of it. So, it's not that you're a slave of lust. It's that you picked the wrong woman to marry. She wasn't of age to wait, to have. You could pick another woman. You don't, you know, like, it's ridiculous. I took another mistress without the sanction of wedlock. Okay, so you sent the one away. You could have kept her. Now you're doing the same thing over again. Why not marry that lady? This meant that the disease of my soul would continue unabated. In fact, it would be aggravated. And under the watch and ward of uninterrupted habit, it would persist into the state of marriage. Furthermore, the wound that I had received when my first mistress was wrenched away showed no signs of healing. At first the pain was sharp and searing, but then the wound began to fester, and though the pain was duller, there was less the hope of a cure. See, polygamy. This is why polygamy is better. You know, you could have married both those mistresses and the lady you're waiting for. Literally. Praise and honor be yours, O fountain of mercy, as my misery grew worse and worse. You came closer to me, though I did not know it. Your hand was poised, ready to lift me from the mire and wash me clean. Nothing prevented me from the plunging still deeper into the gulf of carnal pleasure, except the fear of death and your judgment to come. Through all my changing opinions, this fear never left my heart. With my friends Alypius and Nebridius, I often discussed the nature of good and evil. My judgment, Epicurus, would have won all the honors, were it not that I believed that the soul lived on after death and received the reward or punishment which it deserved. Epicurus had refused to believe this. If we were immortal, I used to say, and could live in perpetual state of bodily pleasure with no fear of losing it, why should we not be happy? What else could we desire? I did not realize that the very root of my misery was that I had sunk to such depths and was so blind that I could not discern the light of virtue and of beauty, that is love for its own sake. For true beauty is seen by the inner eye of the soul. So true beauty seen by the inner eye of the soul. So we often hear beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but he has a little bit of a twist for us in that regard, making it different. Not by the eye of the flesh. And I never wondered what was the source of my pleasure in discussing these topics, shameful as they were, with my friends, nor did I ask myself why, however great my indulgence in sensual pleasure, I could not find happiness, even in the sense in which I then conceived. So he's really pointing something unique out here for us. We're told as Muslims not to discuss sins and aggression. But he's hinting at, like, why is it that men find so much joy in discussing that, which they do. The vulgarity of men. I mean, women, sadly, how they do it as well. I think it's just really commonplace. It's hard not to, because of how lewd society has become. And if you just look at how comedy really pushed that needle, you begin to see, like, how things can get blurred, how things can get pretty weird. And even here we see in his time, so long ago, men struggled with that as well. But that he can't find, even no matter how much he indulges, he just really can't find happiness in. Reminds me of the Andrew Tate clip where he has some whore on his lap in a bikini there in a sauna, and it's his birthday party, it's his birthday, and him and his brother Tristan, whatever his name is, are celebrating, and he says, "I'm not happy." And there's just like some whore on his lap, and you're like, well, it's quite common for men to finally wake up and realize that the chicken head is not really making them happy. Think about when Scarface in Tomatana, he got that woman that he wanted, Elvira, whatever her name was. She was a cocaine addict and alcoholic, and he goes, "She's a donkey. Her woman's so palora, she can't even grow a baby, man." And then he's like, "Is this it? Is this what it's all about?" And he's drunk, just snorting coke, and it's when they're at that dinner table, and he just feels that he's got everything of materialism, but he's still unhappy. And he was very, if he's noticed that he didn't have any children, but he valued the lives of children greatly, you know. but he didn't get to have a family. And he got his prize gold digger, but it didn't make him happy. So when you see like Hugh Hefner types, men who really make it seem that just endless orgies are the way to go, those men, they kind of get used to it and get bored of it. And yet I certainly love them for their own sakes. Oh yes, I had these friends, and I felt that they loved me for the sake in turn. What crooked path I trod, what dangers threatened my soul, when it rashly hoped that by abandoning you, it would find something better. Whichever way it turned, on front or back or sides, it lay on a bed that was hard. For in you alone the soul can rest. For in you alone the soul can rest. So we seek refuge in Allah. You're only supposed to turn to Allah, place your hope in Allah, trust in Allah. And when you are upon the path of Tawheed, you're going to feel that sense of connection. So you can see here, St. Augustine is admitting that the soul can only rest in God. You know, you are there to free us from the misery of error. Misery of error. Which leads us astray, to set on us your own path, and to comfort us by saying, run on, for I shall hold you up. I shall lead you and carry you on to the end. Now we're in book VII. By now, my adolescence, with all its shameful sins, was dead. I was approaching mature manhood. But the older I grew, the more disgraceful was my self-delusion. I could imagine no kind of substance except such as is normally seen by the eye. So substance seen by the eye. So he mentioned beauty. I got some cranberry juice. Forget how sour it is. It's good for like bladder health and cleanses. Woo! But it is so tart, not refreshing at all. And so if you're wondering why I might make a face, because this is very tart. But I'm gonna finish it, inshallah. So he talked about how there's this beauty that the eye of the soul can detect, and not like the fleshly eye. And then he just mentioned here substance that are not seen by our earthly eye, but a sort of spiritual eye, and things that are seen in a different way. But I did not think of you, my God, in the shape of a human body, for I had rejected this idea ever since I had first begun to study philosophy. See, this is where I would be with him. I don't imagine God having a human body. You can't compare Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his creation. We would say just whatever befits his majesty. But the human form is quite weak and pathetic. We're hairless. Before antibiotics, a simple scratch could really bring you down with infection. Okay? We got Neosporin, rubbing alcohol, hydrogen peroxide. We got things to help us. But we're like very fragile. A turtle got a shell. Our stomachs, our intestines is just squishing all up in there. We're just like, we get sliced open and you just see everything come out. We don't have thick hides like the elephant. Perfect vision. Like, we're very weak. Our teeth not sharp like the lion. We don't grow new teeth like sharks that just have endless teeth coming in. Have you ever looked at how sharks can shed their teeth and grow new ones? The owl being able to see night. Humans are very weird. Just our hands. We miss a finger, we can't do as much. Yet there's creatures like the gecko I forget what kind of lizard or gecko, whatever he is. He loses his tail, he grows it back. You know, we can't fly. We get too cold, we get sick. We're too hot, we get sick. There's animals that can literally drink water from the river, be chill. If we have water with parasites, we get very ill. Animals can eat raw pork, raw chicken. They're fine, raw turkey. We have to cook things. Like, we have so many sensibilities. So many. Not to mention our cancer rates, dementia rates. It's ridiculous. Our skull, like, by being bipedal, because we can walk on two legs, we've assumed that we're the best because we can do that. But we can't run that fast. The fact that a cow can literally just give birth and the baby's walking right after the calf, and it's really not too big of a deal, but humans have to scream in pain. The baby cannot come out, get stuck. Human babies are extremely fragile with their immune systems. I mean, we're not that great. We're unique because we have consciousness in terms of we can make devices and, you know, create culinary stuff and build cars, and our brains are interesting. But our overall body design, we can see how vulnerable we really are. Literally, to stay to stay warm, you need to wear fur of another animal pelts, just to go into the snow. We can't hold our breath very long. We're not natural swimmers. I can take a puppy and I can hold their feet over water and they start treading like this. I used to do it with my grandma's chihuahuas. And they just know. But there's adult humans that if they got pushed into the water, they don't know how to float and they can't swim and they're gonna die. It's really quite bizarre. So to think of God having a body like us, that don't make no sense. And I was glad to find that because our eyeball shape limits us, because I have no idea what the creator and sustainer of the universe looks like. But the fact that we know angels can take the shapes of humans and change themselves, then naturally we would know that God wouldn't just, like, need to be a baby and then grow up and, like, what? You know? That's not my thing. And I was glad to find that our spiritual mother, your Catholic Church, also rejected such beliefs, but I did not know how else to think of you. I was only a man, and weak man at that, but I tried to think of you as a supreme God, the only God, the true God. So the supreme, we say Allah is the supreme in glory. There's no God but Allah. And we also say, now this is where the Trinity comes in. It's like, oh, it's a dog with 3 heads, but each brain within that skull has its own mind. Yeah, they share a heartbeat, but one can get distracted, the other two are doing something. They clearly have different wills. When you meet humans that have 2 heads, there's just 2 different brains. 2-headed animals. Just look at a 2-headed cow, 2-headed snakes. They may share the same abdomen, but that doesn't mean they have the same consciousness within each brain. With all my heart I believe that you could never suffer decay or hurt or change. For though I did not know how or why this should be, I understood with complete certainty that what is subject to decay is inferior. So we say Allah is the supreme in glory, is perfect. So here he mentions what decays is inferior. What decays is inferior. And that which is not, and without hesitation, I place that which cannot be harmed above that which can. Okay, so placing what? So let's put it right here. So what can be harmed is less than. So all humans are touchable, as in they cannot escape Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah can get you wherever you are. There's no place you can hide. If Allah has decreed for you something, you cannot escape His will. So, when we think about how funny it is that a person who worships Shaitan can hurt them, but they can't hurt Shaitan. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can foist and totally ruin the plan of Shaitan. And for us, we know that Shaitan is afraid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and has only been given respite for a time and will ultimately be defeated. So we know that Allah is greater than Iblis. And no human can hurt the creator and sustainer of the universe. We know that. So we have to remember that. Robots can decay. Robots can be harmed. So a robot is not better than God. There are people who place great hope in artificial intelligence. But the thing is, it can be harmed and it can decay, just like humans. Because the elements have a way of breaking down even the mightiest of mountains. The mightiest. And time makes things decay. And I saw that what remains constant is better than that which is changeable. So, what is constant? What is changeable? My heart was full of bitter protest against the creations of my imagination, and this single truth was the only weapon with which I could try to drive from my mind's eye all the unclean images which swarmed before it. But hardly had I brushed them aside then, and the flicker of an eyelid, they crowded upon me again, forcing themselves upon my sight and clouding my vision, so that, although I did not imagine you in the shape of a human body, I could not free myself from the thought that you were some kind of bodily substance extended in space. He couldn't free bodily substance extended in space, either permeating the world or diffused in infinity and beyond it. This substance I thought of as something not subject to decay or harm or variation, and therefore better than any might suffer corruption, damage, or change. I reasoned this way because if I tried to imagine something without dimensions of space, it seemed to me that nothing, absolutely nothing, remained, not even a void. For if a body were removed from the space which it occupied, and that space remained empty of any body whatsoever, whether of earth, water, air, or sky, there would still remain an empty space. Nothing would be there, but it would still be a space. My wits were so blunt, and I was so completely unable to even see clearly into my own mind. So unable to see into his own mind, that I thought that whatever had no dimensions in space must be absolutely nothing at all. If it did not or could not have qualities related to space, such as density, sparseness, or bulk, I thought it must be nothing, for my mind ranged in imagination over shapes and forms such as familiar to the eye, and I did not realize that power of thought by which I formed these images was itself something quite different from them, and yet could not form them unless it were itself something, and something great enough to do so. Shapes, forms, qualities. So I thought of you too, O life of my life, calls God, O life of my life. And then the first life has a capital L. Oh, that's sour. As a great being with dimensions extended everywhere, throughout infinite space, permeating the whole mass of the world, and reaching in all directions beyond it, without limit, so that the earth and the sky and all creations were full of you, and their limits were within you. Their limits within God, all creation were full of you. So we would say, I think, Allah is above his throne. We wouldn't say that God exists within people. Well, you had no limits at all. For the air that is, the atmosphere which covers the earth, is a material body. But it does not block out the light of the sun. That's a good point. The atmosphere. The light passes through it and penetrates it, not by breaking it or splintering it, but by filling it completely. In the same way, I imagine that you were able to pass through material bodies, not only in the air and the sky and the sea, but also the earth, and that you could penetrate to all their parts, the greatest and the smallest alike, so that they were filled with your presence, and by this unseen force you ruled over all that you had created, from within and from without. So, ruled all that he created from within and without. We would say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is control of all things. This was the theory to which I held, because I could imagine you in no other way. But it was a false theory, for if it were true, it would mean that a greater part of the earth would contain a greater part of you, and a smaller part less in proportion. Everything would be filled with your presence, but in such a way that the body of an elephant would contain more of you than the body of a sparrow, because one is larger than the other and occupies more space. Exactly. That's a good point. You saw there. But for us, I think we wouldn't say that, because when you see an animal, you're like, that's pretty trippy. They have their own little consciousness, their own little unique personalities. When you stare at them, you can see like the magnificence of the design of the creator. But we wouldn't say that the creator is in them. Rather, I think it would be more accurate to say like you can see signs of Allah, because you're like, look at the beautiful feathers, you know, that's miraculous. Traveling throughout the earth and seeing all the testimonies of this earth being created, instead of coming from a big bang. You know, scientists are quite perverted. A gang bang, big bang, you know, perversion, like, where it's like bam, like the terms they use. Like, it's just bizarre. Atheists ask for signs, but they just think everything is just natural selection, that nothing is uniquely designed. But for me, the more time you watch animals and spend in nature, you begin to see how they are just these wonderful little critters, but we don't say Allah exists in them. So Allah doesn't need to occupy the space of any created being. This is where we would differ from what he's saying, from my understanding. So you would distribute your parts piecemeal among the parts of the world, to each more or less according to its size. This, of course, is quite untrue, but at that time you had not yet given me light into my darkness. So at least he was smart enough to see the error of his theory. Error of his theory. His hypothesis. His wondering stuff. You see, he gets us thinking, but you know, it's almost like a test for us as well as Muslims when we read this, or just theology and philosophy students in general. But if you were to think that God is in animals, you would start to become a pagan, and then you start to become a weirdo vegan. Like, we can't eat this fish because it has God in it. No. We ain't into all that. You can just see the remarkability of them and admire them, but you wouldn't say like the creator of the universe is in them. Interesting. Let me know what you think. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like to support my work and me read more about what I write, you can go to www.subscribestar.com/MilhonArchive. I will see you there.